Hello and welcome back to your notes videos. This notes video is on active transport. Last class we learned about passive transport. Specifically, there were three types of passive transport. Which one is being shown in the image on your screen? Our hint is that there's a protein involved. Proteins are hollow to let large molecules pass through. If there's a protein helping the transport happen, then we call it facilitated diffusion. What about this one? It's water passing through. H2O is osmosis. Osmosis is the movement of water from high concentration to low concentration. H2O goes with the flow. This one does not label the small dots, so we're just going to call them molecules. It is showing molecules moving across the membrane from high concentration to low concentration. Correct. This one is just basic diffusion. That's a review of our last time notes. We learned about passive transport, which is transport that does not require energy since it moves from high to low. This class, we are going to learn about active transport. Active transport, there we go. All right, active transport requires energy. That is the main difference between passive and active. Active transport uses energy to go from low to high. So it's the opposite of active transport or passive transport. Think about rolling a ball up a hill. In order to push a ball up a hill, this is going to require energy. Whereas passive transport was rolling a ball down a hill. That did not require energy. So, active transport goes from low to high with the use of energy. So, think about our school. All right, when the hallways get really crowded, it's sometimes hard to move in them. It does require energy going from our low concentration classroom into those very high concentration hallways. The same is true for our cell. It requires energy when we're trying to go against the concentration gradient, when we're trying to add ourselves into the crowd. How this can be done is through a couple ways. The first way is through pumps. So those proteins we learned about earlier, some of them are pumps, which means they push molecules through the membrane, and that requires energy. So that would be if the hallway is super crowded, me pushing you into the hallway to make room for you so that there's space for you to walk. That's what a protein pump is. It requires energy to push from low to high. If you look at the image off on the right, there's a low concentration inside the cell and a high concentration outside the cell. So it's pushing from low to high. And it uses energy. Another word for energy is ATP. ATP is energy. I also sometimes remind myself that ATP could stand for active transport because active transport requires energy. It requires ATP. So take a look here. What are some signs that tell us that this is active transport? The easiest sign is I see it says ATP, and I know that ATP is energy. So active transport requires energy. The other thing I could look at is the direction of the arrow. My arrow is pointing from a low number of dots to a high number of dots. If it's pointing from low to high, it's active transport because I know going from low to high is going to require energy. There's two other types of active transport that involves your cell membrane: endocytosis and exocytosis. Endocytosis is when molecules are entering the cell. The cell membrane bends and swallows a molecule and pinches itself off so that there's a vesicle inside the cell. Exocytosis is the same in reverse. It's when a vesicle reaches the cell membrane, so the cell membrane opens up to let it out. Endo, like enter, exo, like exit. The cell membrane opens and bends to let things in and out. So, which organelle helps transport large extracellular molecules out of the cell? I just said it. Can you remember? If you said vesicle, you would be correct. A vesicle is like a vehicle. It transports things in and out of the cell membrane. Which of the following is true of exocytosis? So let's go through the process of elimination. At the bottoms, with red, it does not require energy. Well, we know that's not true because exocytosis is a form of active transport, and active transport requires energy. So it's not that one. We know that exocytosis requires a vesicle. We just went over. So it's not my light blue one either. My green one says that it comes in. Exo is like exit, so we know it's not going in, it's actually going out. That leaves only one, which is our correct answer. It's a form of active transport. Exocytosis requires energy to push things out of the cell. Engulfing bacteria by white blood cells is what? When you are engulfing, you're having it enter. Which one of these means to enter the cell? If you said endocytosis, you would be correct. Endocytosis is when the cell membrane opens up to swallow things inside. So, take a look at these pictures. Explain one way that you can tell the difference between a picture of facilitated diffusion on the left and active transport on the right. Well, I can definitely notice some similarities. For example, both pictures of facilitated diffusion and the picture of active transport have proteins in them. Those large chunks in the cell membrane are proteins, so that's not going to help me figure it out. What I need to look at is the arrow. Is the arrow pointing from high to low, like it is in facilitated diffusion, where there's a lot of dots to where there's very few dots? Or is it pointing from low to high, like it is in active transport? Over here, the arrow is pointing from where there's very low number of dots to where there's a very high number of dots. The arrow will be able to tell you if it's facilitated diffusion or active transport. So, let's review. Last class we learned about passive transport. Today's class, we learned about active transport. What's the difference? Passive transport does not require what? Energy. Passive transport does not need energy, whereas active transport does. Another word for energy in science is ATP. ATP is energy. ATP is required for active transport. Active transport moves molecules how? From high to low or low to high? Active transport requires energy. Which one takes more energy, going down a slide or up a slide? It takes more energy to go up a slide. So active transport goes from low to high. We call this moving against the gradient. You are pushing against what is naturally happening. Passive transport is the easy one. It does not require energy. It goes from high to low concentration. We call this moving with the concentration gradient. That's all for today's class.